From the hidden secrets of our backyards to the realities of the third world, we take a raw and real look into the challenges and the pursuits of social justice. Welcome to The Point. She's a graduate of Yale University. Her husband Andy and her are adoptive parents of 2 girls. She has served as a director for public affairs and also in Washington, D.C. for Senator Cranston and Congressman Leland. She is the co-founder of FosterMore, a coalition of media and entertainment companies, nonprofits, businesses, and philanthropic organizations working to create greater understanding, empathy, and action to improve the future for youth in foster care. FosterMore takes a holistic approach. They shine light on the accomplishments and the potential of foster youth. And they do all of this while securing support for their academic success and also creating a pipeline for potential foster parents. She has great academic success, she has won numerous awards, and she is working hard on policies, procedures, and other elements of holistic care around foster youth. Please join me in welcoming to the show, Jennifer Perry. So we are excited to learn about you and the organization and really just get like a thorough understanding of exactly what it is and how people can get involved. I love personal stories and like understanding how people got involved in social justice work in the first place. So if you can give us a bit of a background about yourself and really how you got into this work.
I guess I've always been inclined. There's something about that whole notion of helping people. I'm certainly not, as my husband will complain and attest to, not money driven. I feel like, if you have skills and abilities, if you can do them for the greater good, as it should be. So when I was in college, I ran a charities drive that was, again, all about giving back to the community. I was at college in New Haven. That was a pretty under-resourced community. So we had this whole charities drive, kind of started there. At the same time, when I was tutoring, I think it really started when I was tutoring Head Start kids. That really, brought home the need for additional resources to, again, these under-resourced communities. So those 2 things. And then when I was in Washington, D.C., I worked on Capitol Hill for a congressman from Texas, Mickey Leland, who cared deeply about these issues, actually went on to do a lot of really good work on hunger before he was killed in a plane crash, doing his hunger work, actually. And then when I was in D.C., I was also tutoring underserved youth, so it's been this driving force. And in DC, I felt like I was obviously doing public policy work, and that was a really important way to give back. And then I moved to LA. I was lucky enough to, I had been working for a senator from California, and then to go to work for Norman Lear, the creator of All in the Family and a multitude of other organizations, People for the American Way, an extraordinarily forward-thinking, visionary person who's been thinking about being an activist and change for a long time. And he's still doing it. He's either 98 or 99. I can't keep track, but it was really wonderful because it was like working for a private citizen, but who was so public-minded that you almost felt like you're in the public sector. And I did his charitable work and his public affairs. I guess there is, a through line throughout what I've done that sort of moved me in this direction. When I was working for Norman and the families that Children's Action Network together, and there's a link between Children's Action Network and FosterMore that I'll explain. They were looking to use their particular entertainment industry expertise and resources to make a difference for children. All of them have been doing work in children's areas and felt that the issues needed to be faced up and more attention brought to them. Norman was winding down his philanthropy. These families were looking for someone. It was perfect. So they brought me on. They had an idea, and they brought me on to flesh out the idea. Our first big campaign was childhood immunization, because again, we were looking for an issue that, needed a spotlight shown on it. At the time, this was, more than 20 years ago, we were in the middle of a huge uptick in measles. Kids were dying. You had a generation had grown up without the specter of a deadly childhood disease. So we did a big campaign, partners with the Centers for Disease Control. To your point about that in the community activism that you mentioned earlier, we told people, we did a whole public awareness campaign and said, you have to do this, life-saving. And at the same time, we organized in communities to increase access to healthcare, because it's not right to tell someone, you got to do this and it's vital. And then they go to a closed door and they're like, but you told me to do this. That was our first big sort of issue campaign. What we wanted to do was leave behind these coalitions and communities that continue to do the work. And some of them are still doing that work today. And we immunized thousands and thousands of children.
Wow.
It was interesting. sorry, I'm really digressing now, but I've been
No,
thinking about
I love it. Just keep going.
we're talking about vaccinations now, and you had some of the same dynamic. There was a
So I'm wondering,
core group convinced that immunizations cause autism. So there was a small group of very convinced people who were against it. And all the science had come out and said, absolutely not. But, I get it. Something happens to your kid. But we were fortunate. And, we got all sorts of weird threats, but it was so much easier because there wasn't social media fueling it. It was harder.
That's interesting to think about.
It was very different. We knew about it. And I think one of the main points they used to lobby was the Hill, but there certainly wasn't the array of platforms now where you can, in a good way, have your voice be heard, and in a non-constructive way, have your voice be heard. So it's just interesting to think back. The social dynamic that is so different now that we're changing. And it's changed that campaign now. I mean, we're looking at a country that is somewhat polarized still on the issue. We could really digress on there. So
that was great. I love that. I mean, there's very few people that I've met that have like such a direct line of work in vaccines. And it's interesting to hear kind of your perspective of how things went back then and then how things are going now. So I appreciate that.
I guess the other through lines, I'm a deep believer in science. So I believe the science at the time, and I believe the science now. And on to foster care. So we did this campaign, we had this leave behind, and we were looking at the fact that here is an issue that truly also lived in the shadows. 20 some odd years ago, very few people knew what foster care was, what a foster youth was. And as you know, since the greatest predictor of a child going to foster care is poverty, you already have the dividing line. Poverty makes people live in the shadows, and then youth driven into foster care through poverty is sort of like another layer of shadow, as it were. We thought, my founders, they're storytellers. So how can we tell the stories of youth in foster care, of people who've adopted youth from foster care? How can we tell stories so that people start to understand better who the population is? And ultimately, this gets to what we do with FosterMore, put themselves in the narrative, because we all know the research has shown, you can give people statistics, but if people can identify with that one person, that one entity, or put themselves in the narrative, they're more likely to become engaged. So one of the first things we did was a television show in partnership with Dave Thomas from Wendy's. And the whole idea was to bring to light the issue of adoption from foster care, which again, people were very familiar with private and international. Nothing wrong with them. We just felt like, okay, right now there's 122,000 kids who need adopted permanent homes. In the United States, the numbers were slightly lower, but roughly the same. And so we created a television show that told the stories of families who've adopted foster care with entertainment wrapped around it. So people would tune in to see Faith Hill, and then they'd get a heartwarming story of the family who adopted from foster care. It's been on the air now for 21 years, and it was particularly gratifying at about year 8 or 9 when we started to be able to tell the stories of families who'd seen the show, had not previously considered foster care adoption and adopted from foster care. So we were then able to tell those stories. So we knew, as you know, the hardest thing about a public awareness campaign, sometimes being able to measure it. And then particularly in an issue like foster care, where you're not asking someone to stop using plastic water bottles, right? You are saying, we want you to take on a life-changing event, a profound commitment that will change a number of lives, but it's huge. And the studies have shown that on average, if people are contemplating being a foster parent or adopting from foster care, it's a 1 to 2 year just contemplation period, because you're thinking through, and it should be, because it's a major decision. We started with Home for the Holidays. We did a number of other programs, a National Adoption Day. We do films of children who are waiting to be adopted. It's all about normalizing the process, telling the stories, bringing the kids out of the shadow, and reminding everyone that a youth in foster care is like your kid, your neighbor's kid, your niece, your nephew, your grandchild. They have the same dreams. They are resilient. They want someone to be at their soccer game to help them with their homework, to walk them down the aisle. Part of it is just saying these kids need everything your kids need and more in some respects because of the trauma they've been through. We've done this work for a long time. And then I started working with my co-founder, David Ambrose, who is a former foster youth. I'm a former foster parent. I'll get to that in a minute. So there's a lot of
yeah, no, that's fantastic.
You won't get the visual on that.
Yeah. Those of you who can't see it, she did some pretty impressive gestures with her hands.
David had said the same goals. He had done a public service announcement, saying, I'm amazing, reminding people who youth in foster care are. And we thought this was the start of something that we could really build out on. And it totally meshed with Children's Action Network mission. So we started with a broad-based public awareness campaign. We're still doing it. And again, the idea is tell people who youth in foster care are, tell them about their dreams, their hopes, their extraordinary resilience, so that you can A, engage people in helping the youth, and B, help drive resources that will help them succeed. And we knew intuitively that, again, to my earlier point, there was that huge kind of awareness divide, that people just weren't terribly cognizant of who the youth were and frequently had real misconceptions. So early on in our FosterMore work, we did a series of focus groups, and we deliberately chose people with combined incomes of $100,000 or more, sort of, suss out attitudes. And it was for better or worse, as we thought. Not a single person in any of the focus groups had met a foster youth. And they had the misconception, they're scary. We showed one woman a PSA of a foster youth with braces. She's like, I didn't know they got braces. It's sort of like, they got the things we knew. So we knew that we had to continue this broad-based effort to say foster youth are resilient. They are our responsibility. They need resources. And then because we're situated in LA and we have this entertainment industry component also to LA and to FosterMore, we looked at addressing a problem that is acute in LA, particularly acute in LA and across the country, which is the tremendous shortage of foster parents. Your founders are familiar with that, and that's probably why they stepped up. LA is the largest child welfare system in the country, and we're at an uptick in the number of youth in care. So we said, what can we do to bring more foster parents into the system? Well, not really, recruit more foster parents. And how can we employ new technologies that hadn't hitherto been used in child welfare? So that's right. You're getting like the most run on. Do you want me to stop for a minute?
No, I love it. No, I'm here to learn. So you're good. This is helpful.
My monologue. Not a soliloquy, because I don't have any question about what I'm doing, but a monologue. So
I'm here for it.
So we said, all right, we have this incredible tool, which is big data. And there's a lot of big data that's been used for not so good, but we can use big data for good. So working with our social media firm, brand new, it's like, why don't we look at how do we use Facebook as a tool for digital recruitment? And we started out doing that. We created a series of ads. There's ads/PSAs, right? They're great because they have story of my life as the music, and Ty Burrell does the call to action. So they have that nice piece of them. But ultimately, I think they succeed because they're stories. They're stories of these families. And so people can put themselves in those stories. They're stories of families who are joyful and giving, and then you see these youth. I think that's one of the reasons that they work, because of the appeal. And they also work because over time, the great thing about working with this digital recruitment tool is the degree to which you can continuously target. And so what we've been doing when we first did it, very broad based, we were learning, right? So we got a number of leads, but they didn't always translate because it was broadcasting in the literal sense. So over the last couple of years, what we've done is really been able to create profiles, focus our recruitment, speed up the response time, so that now we are at a point where our leads are really stronger. We're actually bringing foster parents into the trainings, and campaign has generated hundreds and hundreds of new foster parents. And the outgrowth of it is that people who aren't ready to make the commitment to be a foster parent or want to be a mentor, we're able to separate those out, and we're handing some of the mentor leads over to CASA or the other organizations. So that's one of the things that FosterMore does broadly, brings the issue to your attention and then says, okay, you want to help these youth? Here's our ladder of engagement. If you want to be a foster parent, fantastic. Not everyone can be a foster parent. What if you're a CASA? And because I should explain what CASA is, a court-appointed special advocate. And there are CASAs all over the country. And what they do is they train people so that you go in with a foster youth and you are their advocate in court. They have an attorney, but the attorneys have big caseloads. So what's great is for the youth as a CASA, you are that youth advocate. You see that youth all the way through their journey through the system. So it's a great program.
I had no idea that existed.
Well, the only problem with CASA is not enough people know about it.
Right. Yeah.
And it's really helpful because the other side of it is, all the studies have shown that the youth who age out of care and manage to, quote, make it. Should we note that I, of course, did literal quote signs? I never noticed how much I talk to myself. So I was on Zoom. I mean, it's
quote unquote, yes.
Right. So, so the studies have shown that the foster youth who succeed, they're almost at 100%. It's been there was an adult in their life, who actually helped them, and it doesn't have to be a foster parent. Sometimes it's a custodian or a coach or someone who has sort of said, all right, here's the path. I believe in you, some level. It's a really, really important factor. And so, of course, CASAs are that on steroids, right? Because they are really right there for the youth. There's a number of there's a great program you should talk to called Friends of the Children. They actually go in and they have paid foster parents. So you're that parent, you're in that kid's life all the way through. So it's a really good program. But that's what the youth need, is that one person. So FosterMore says you can become a foster parent, become a CASA, or everyone understands education, and education is so crucial. You can help contribute to a scholarship, because another thing that happens with youth in foster care is that 70-80% want to pursue higher education, and only 5 to 8% end up completing, because they come in with so many challenges and a number of not only financial, but related back to their time in the system. So it's a really great way that people can contribute to scholarships and to foster youth completing their education. They complete high school at a lower rate than the general population. Again, their attendance at a higher education institution is much, much lower. Things that are working to change that, but that's another super important way that people can help.
Yeah, I read on the website that 65% of foster youth experience 7 or more school changes. That's a stat that really stood out to me, because I think sometimes we might look at, the quote unquote success of people, and there can be a lot of judgment, like you were saying, kind of a depersonalization of why people do or do not succeed without knowing their background. But thinking about not only is your family changing, your entire environment changing, but I mean, 7 school changes is insane.
Can you imagine? Right. And so it puts them often 1 to 2 years behind.
Wow.
And then the other part of that, there's some super interesting work done by a guy named Bruce Perry, no relation, who's looked at the challenges to learning when you've been through trauma. It's like the brain is a series of Lego building blocks. And if you're going through sort of quote unquote normal development, those building, the brain is arranging itself like it's supposed to. You are traumatized. The brain is building sort of a fight or flight infrastructure. And if you're triggered all the time, your brain is building the fight or flight, and it's not able to take in the information that's given to you. So, sometimes people think the youth are being stubborn or obstinate or difficult. It's just literally the brain's like, I can't take that in, because my traumatized brain is so busy waiting for what the hell is going to happen out there. And I'm sure he would be not that appreciative of my reductionist explanation of your research. But anyhow,
we're beginner learners, so it's good for us.
But what he has talked about, and it's so smart. So you take a youth who's been in foster care, and you, in essence, start teaching them at the time they were brought into care, because you're going back, you're reteaching the brain. Yeah. Started talking about this 10, 15 years ago. It's part of the overall greater understanding in the field about the impact of it. I think, really, truly, foster care started when youth were with families that were very poor. The idea, there was this idea that you would, again, I'm oversimplifying, put in place with more resources, that would fix the problem. And now what you have, the primary reason, the second most primary reason for a child going to foster care is poverty and substance abuse. So you have a greater level of trauma than had previously existed. And I think it's, taking the field some time to catch up with the notion of how do you address, you have to address the trauma, and you have to be cognizant of the trauma.
Yeah, that makes total sense, that there has to be a holistic approach. In a lot of our work we do throughout Haiti, it's similar where, we do a lot of job creation and whatnot, but at the same time, like there has to be an acknowledgement of the day-to-day that people are going through. And there has to really be like a biopsychosocial, like holistic approach to that. So You touched on it briefly, but explain to like us beginner learners, like really how a child ends up in foster care. Like what is kind of the foundation that even and how it works.
The way a child ends up in foster care is a report, usually from a neighbor. Mandated reporters are people who interact with the child, not daily, but on a regular basis. So, pediatrician, a teacher, someone who is noted, who suspects there may be abuse. So they report that. And mandated reporters, they're mandated to do it. And, but it happens from neighbors. It can happen from family members if there's a concern. The child service agency goes out to investigate, determine whether the child is at risk in their home. And
is it always, I'm sorry to interrupt, is it always physical abuse, or it might just be that the child is showing signs of not being emotionally present, maybe while they're at school? Or
actually it's mostly extreme neglect, physical abuse. I know it's
okay.
It would be physical abuse, but that's a smaller percentage. It's mostly extreme neglect, and frequently extreme neglect because of substance abuse on the part of the parents.
Very interesting. Okay.
So it's the child who is totally distracted in school, is coming to school with no shoes, is, just a whole bunch of signs that, people are aware of, or talking about something that's happening in the home, or, so yes, interestingly enough, substance abuse is the primary cause of extreme neglect. And that's the primary cause of these reports. If it's determined that the child is not safe in their home, then the child is removed to placed in emergency foster care. There's a hearing, and at the hearing, if the child is detained, determined that they're not ready to go back to their home, usually there's court-ordered treatment for the parents, substance abuse, anger management, and the parents have a certain amount of time, and it's case by case. Sometimes parents have more kids in the system or not, it's to follow and adhere to what the court has said. These are the steps you need to take if you want to And the first goal of the system is reunification, because the long-term effects of separating a child from their biological parents are hugely detrimental. So really the impetus is to keep the child with the family. And again, what's growing over time is the recognition that the families, the bio families, need additional support and resources. The idea is strengthen the family first, because the child remaining with that family with the right support is the best outcome. The goal is always reunification. If that doesn't work over time, what can happen is, if it's determined that the parent is not at any juncture going to be able to take care of the child, then that is when they start to looking at another avenue to permanency. So, and again, those timeframes vary tremendously from case to case. Each one, there's over 420,000 children in the child welfare system right now. There's about 120,000 that need permanent adoptive homes. So then again, those numbers don't stack up exactly, but that gives you a sense. A lot go back and reunified, and then a number are freed for adoption. Interestingly enough, it's over 50% of foster parents end up adopting their foster children, which is a good outcome.
Yeah.
And the other thing that is changing in a good way, back to, if the child can't stay with their biological family, the first move is to place them with relatives. It's called kin care or kinship care. Again, because then you're not removing them completely from a known environment. You're continuing, there's some kind of continuation, some kind of through line, because there's a sense of family. That's happening more and more. And the other thing that's good that's happening is, for a long time, foster parents get a reimbursement. People talk about it barely enough. You hear all these stories of,
kind of the stereotypes and some of the horror stories. Yeah.
If you create a system, there are going to be some people that game a system. The payments that are made to foster parents, it's really hard. So the vast majority of foster parents are not doing this so they can game the system. But part of the problem is that with kin care, the rates that kin were being paid were less than foster parents, and back to that poverty issue, and so there's been a growing.
So there's less than an incentive, and there wasn't, the direct support that was needed. Yeah.
Yeah, some parity there. Again, that's an ongoing movement. So in LA, they've made great strides in putting youth into kin care. That's like one of the things that's.
Yeah. And so a foster parent, why is there such a great need for foster parents? How does somebody become a foster parent? A question I've always had is, when somebody becomes a foster parent, do they know right away if that child will be available for adoption, or can it change throughout the course of their time with that child?
Really, one of the reasons there's a tremendous need for foster parents right now, there's been a big uptick in the foster care population because of the opioid crisis. Foster care, the populations are always most pronounced in urban areas because you have a concentration of poverty and under-resourced families. But interestingly, the opioid epidemic has had a significant impact on increasing numbers in foster care, back to the extreme neglect due to substance abuse. That has obviously created a huge need for foster parents. And I think one of the reasons there's a continuing need is because people really don't understand what foster parents are. There's a lot of that bad press. People are in it for the money. And again, if you have people who are very concerned about foster youth and have those misconceptions, it's a little harder to recruit those foster parents. So we need to continue to do the piece of reminding people that foster youth are promising, resilient, wonderful youth that need the same thing your kids do. And then we need to build up foster parents, make people understand them more, give them greater resources. They're also under-resourced. I personally think that foster parents should be elevated to the level of, it's a national service. They should be celebrated and elevated because you are, in essence, taking in a child you don't know. You have no idea, what's going to happen. It's extraordinary. You're turning your life around so that you can provide support and a pathway for youth. It's amazing. It's a remarkable thing to do at every level. Even if it's one foster youth or if it's hundreds of foster youth, as you read those great stories of people who do that. I do think there should be a movement to continue to celebrate foster parents. And the other thing that I think is super important for people to know, I think there's misconception about, who can be a foster parent. And the truth is, can be, straight, gay, single, older, anyone can be a foster parent. You really just have to have the desire. The process is not meant to exclude, it's meant to protect the child. So if you're interested in becoming a foster parent, you go to an orientation. That gives you some sense. It's good because you're getting a sense of, okay, what is this commitment? What am I getting into? You get fingerprinted so you can make sure that, you're not, as my daughter would say, really technical term, a sketch human being. No, you wanted to go. So you're fingerprinted to make sure you're not
sketch.
You haven't endangered children in your past. And there's a home study, again, practical. If you've never had a child in your house before, you forget that, bleach under your kitchen sink is not a good idea. So it's good, again, to protect the child. You take classes, and the classes, again, are set up to help you understand the issues that foster children face. So it's helpful. And it can, depending where you are, 6, 8, 10 months, to go through the process. And one of the things I think it's also super important for people to remember is be honest with whatever agency you're working with. So you'll either work with a government agency or a foster care agency to help to go through the training and the certification. But it's super important if you're becoming a foster parent, for you to tell the person you're working with, you know what, I think I can only take one child, or I'm comfortable with 4. I think a 3-year-old is probably the youngest I can do. It's people think, I can't do that. It's really important that you do because you want to create a situation where everybody's comfortable. And the only effect of that is sometimes you might wait longer to be matched because in the end, it's probably a better match. So I just think a lot of people don't know that. And to your last question about whether that's a good change over the years. Child welfare policy changes laboriously, probably be the right word. And it used to be that if you were a foster parent and you were thinking about adopting that kid, forget it. No, you weren't supposed to form any kind of attachment. Now there's something called concurrent planning. They know which youth are more likely to end up being freed for adoption because of family history, whatever. You have a sense of the youth from the beginning. Sometimes the outcomes are different than anticipated because the hardest thing about child welfare is it's humanity writ large. Every part, right? There's humanity at every level. So when there's humanity, there's unpredictability.
Great way to put it.
Yeah. So that's a change, and it's a good change because there are some people who just want to be foster parents, and there are some people who want to adopt.
And so what about your personal story? You mentioned at the beginning that you are a former foster parent, or
because we ended up adopting our girls. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. It wasn't because I didn't try and check out.
You were like, I'm out, but I'll advocate for it. Yeah.
A small detail.
Well, you kept me intrigued, so it worked.
Yeah. What happened was, this was about 20 plus years ago. And in LA, we were in one of those moments where there had been a tremendous uptake in the number of youth who were in foster care, more than 20,000. So there was a tremendous need for foster parents. And my husband and I were at a place where we had an extra room, we had a little bit of flexibility, just that moment where we had the ability to step up. We took the classes, and my husband and I set out to be what's known as respite parents. So you're fully trained foster parent, and you're taking the foster youth for a weekend or a couple of days to give the foster parent they live with a break. It's an important thing to do because it can be overwhelming. You may or may not have had kids in your home before. You may have kids who have challenges. So respite parents are very much needed. And I think it's a great thing for people to do. And again, if you're thinking, I want to be a foster parent, but I'm not ready to make the full commitment, I want to kind of put my toe in the water. It's another really good way to become involved in a way to help the youth. So our girls were placed with us. We took them on a couple of weekends. And the funniest one was the first one, because being type A and not having, I told him before, I planned every second of the weekend to the nanosecond. I didn't realize that, little girls have to pee all the time throughout my schedule. Like, oh my God, my whole perfectly.
An important logistic. Yeah.
Oh my God, we're going back to the ladies' room. And then, of course, I made homemade mac and cheese, which they just looked at. It's like, why isn't this orange?
Yeah, right? Where's that neon orange?
What is this? Yes. So we started to learn. And we took them for a couple of other weekends, and they were supposed to go live with their aunt in Delaware. And their foster mom, she was a little rump. She said, can you take them for a while before they go live with their aunt? And, we'd fallen for them. So we're like, okay, sure. Fortunately, I think the aunt took herself out of the equation, and it was great because we had already, completely fallen for them. And we stepped up, we ended up adopting them. And the moment that, well, there's so many moments, but when they first came to live with us, we said, call us whatever you're comfortable, Andy, Jennifer, Mom, whatever you're comfortable with. They called us Andy and Jennifer. And between the pre-placement and the time that they were adopted, it was about 1.5 years, 2 years. And so the day we knew we were going to adopt them, that they were legally free, we told them, they started calling us Mom and Dad. It was like, oh, and their little hearts, they'd been like, they knew the separation, right? They were 7 and 9, but they've been holding on to that distinction. And then it was so funny because literally everything was, hey, Mom, can you do this for me? Mom, hey, Dad, Dad, can you do this for me? That was Mom, Dad, So
I love it.
They were 6 and 8 when they came to live with us, and 8 and 10 when we adopted them. Now they are 31 and 33.
Wow.
So it's been an amazing journey with lots of, it was challenging. It was absolute, but it was the best thing we've ever done. There were definite challenges, but bar none, the best thing we've ever done. And just incredible moments along the way. And because of former situation, we were able to give them their first birthday party, teach them how to swim, teach them how to ride a bike. And our older daughter was the first person in her biological family to go to college. So that was a really nice milestone. They have a number of brothers and sisters, but Angela was the first one. So we've made an impact. It was great. That's an understatement. I'm like, great. Let me think of a better word than great, life-changing, amazing,
Well, if you could see her face, it's glowing right now. So you have the mom glow. So I love it. That's great. Well, thanks for sharing that. I think that's an incredible story. And I think it makes so much more sense. At the beginning, you said, like one of your goals is to help people put themselves in the narrative. And you're right, like sharing stories can really just help us see how we can fit into that. Something that FosterMore also advocates for is getting businesses involved. So if there's business owners, what does that look like, and how can businesses help?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. In essence, since these children are all of our responsibility, you have to look at every facet of society. Like, how can every facet of society step up to help these youth? So you've got individuals who can do stuff, who can take action. And what we created at FosterMore was what we're calling a foster-friendly workplace. And the idea is to ask workplaces to adopt their family policies, their HR policies, to recognize that people who become foster parents have a slightly different situation, obviously, than giving birth to a child or even adopting a child. And that one of the most important times when a foster youth is placed with you is early on, that bonding moment, so that to set things on the right path, as it were. It's a tough moment for the kid, hard moment for the parent. You want to make sure that parents have that time. It's asking companies to adopt a policy that enables some leave for that time and a number of other policies that, in essence, make it easier to become a foster parent if you are working at that particular company. So we have about 10 companies now who've adopted the policy. We're at about 300,000 employees overall, and we're looking to surpass a couple of million this year. It's a common sense policy. And here's the thing. What's also going to happen is, because of the pandemic, we're anticipating that there'll be another one of those upticks in the foster care population, because those mandated reporters that I mentioned earlier, no one's seen these kids. So there may be kids that people haven't seen that may be coming into the system. So it's a really important and crucial time for a company to, sort of recognize this and say, wow, as my, civic duty, this is a way I can really help these kids and really help address a severe problem, which is this shortage of foster parents.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's something I haven't even thought about. Yeah, that parents don't necessarily get leave as the same way as a bio parent might.
And they're a parent, even sometimes it's short term, but it's crucial. And yeah,
I love that. So for the listeners today, you mentioned a few different ways. I believe you called it a ladder of engagement, which I love. Can you just kind of quickly again name off like what those like places of engagement are for people who are in different stages of life or in the thought process?
Sure. One is obviously becoming a foster parent, huge need, but that's a big step.
That's like way up at the ladder. So as you climb the ladder,
that's the top of the ladder. Becoming a court-appointed special advocate or a mentor, linking up with an organization in your community. Those are localized, obviously, the mentor organizations, and you can go on our website and help connect with them, because that's super important. As I mentioned earlier, a caring adult in a foster youth life can make all the difference in how that child, succeeds. So that's huge. Contributing to a scholarship for youth in foster care. We can recommend a number of great orgs, Foster Care to Success, that do exactly that. Again, you can go on the website and see a number of others. And then there's a lot of really wonderful community efforts addressing issues like the fact that often when children are taken into foster care, because it's obviously not planned, their belongings are put in a trash bag. You've heard those stories. They're true. There's
true. Okay.
There's a great group called Together We Rise that has a whole program for duffel bags for youth in foster care. So there's a lot of things you can do at the really local community level. We have one at Children's Action Network, and I've seen them in a number of other cities, boutiques for youth who have aged out of foster care, organizing a place where youth who age out of foster care age out with very little. They come in with very little, they age out with very little. They don't have much of a safety net. There's about 25,000 youth who age out of foster care every year. It's a population that really has a lot of, just basic needs that need to be addressed. So I've seen this, a lot of stores, boutiques, resource places have popped up where youth can access clothing. Companies that are frequently very generous in donating clothing. It's a real need for the youth. They're also digressing into just an important part of, I think, is people knowing and understanding about the sort of along the continuum. Eventually, youth who aren't reunited with their families or adopted age out of the system. In about 26 states at age 21, and it should be all the states, because I'm guessing very few people listening were fully functioning adults at the age of 18. I certainly wasn't.
Same.
So keeping kids in the system 21, enabling them to stay in foster care if it's a good placement or having support services is essential, because the outcomes aren't very good for the youth who age out, because it's really, imagine having a difficult life and then being told you're on your own. You can imagine. At some point in time, 1 in 4 of these youth end up homeless. So the more support systems and the longer they can stay in care or access to resources, the better for them. It's also good because there's been a lot more attention on these youth in the last X number of years, from the child welfare professionals recognizing that the outcomes weren't great, and a number of programs like supported housing, to address the fundamental needs of these youth. And there was a lot of good work done during the pandemic to try and buttress the safety net for these youth too, because the ones that even were in college, no dorms, no place to go, basic needs. So there are a lot of good work was done during the pandemic to address the basic needs of the youth who aged out of care.
That's great. This reminds me a lot of that Mark Wahlberg movie. Is that something that you think people should watch? Is it fairly accurate?
We worked with them a little bit at FosterMore, and it's really well, yes, because it shows the difficulties, the joys. There's some humor in it. They really did a great job on kind of.
I can't think of the name of it right now. Can you think of the name of it? I can't.
Of course, no, because it's Friday afternoon. I can tell you it's Mark Wahlberg and Rose Byrne.
Yeah, it's Instant Family. Instant Family, yes. Yeah, but it seemed like they did. I mean, from what little I know, it seemed like they did a good job of not necessarily glorifying it, but like talking about it in a way that was real, but that was empowering and also educational. So I wanted to know if you felt like it was a good representation of reality.
It was really good. And, that kind of work really helps lift up all the work the organizations are doing, because it was such a positive portrayal. And it said, these are kids that need our support, right? And there was some humor. And, I will say, generally speaking, the child welfare system, people forget that one of the wonderful things about kids is they're unpredictable, that there should be joy and humor in it. So it was kind of a gift. And the other wonderful thing that's happened is obviously Tiffany Haddish out there as a spokesperson for youth in foster care, having been through it herself. These are the things that, people start to pay attention. They start to think differently. She's also got a really great internship program that's getting foster youth internships in the entertainment industry. And that's another place businesses can step up, is providing internships for youth in foster care. There's a great organization called iFoster. It's done a lot of good work, a lot of big companies in doing that. I don't know, at the end of the podcast, is there like a list of resources?
Yeah, I usually put it in the show notes.
It's like CASA and iFoster is great. Together We Rise. Friends of the Children was the other one. That's a little bit bigger, because that's the one where, you're kind of being trained, and that's a little more complicated.
Yeah, that's helpful. I always like to end the conversation with like, is there one thing specifically you'd want listeners to take with them? But before I ask you that, was there anything that you thought is important that we haven't covered yet?
No, I think this is great. This has been a pleasure.
No, it's a pleasure for me. I love your heart, and like you're passionate and you're well educated, and it's really incredible.
Thanks. In the end, what we want to change is, sometimes now when someone tells you they're a foster youth or a former foster youth, I think people are sort of like taken aback. Yep. And really, I think what we want is a world in which someone says, I'm in foster care, or I'm a former foster youth. Someone looks at them and says, oh my God, you must be extraordinary to have gotten this far with all the challenges you've had. You must have an extraordinary, pot of resilience that you can draw on. You must have so much possibility, and you must need someone to help you realize that possibility. How can I step up? How can my community step up to help you be the person that you are? So
I love that. That's so well said. Yeah, well, this has been very educational for me. And I know that our listeners have such hearts for social justice. And a lot of us, at one time or another have thought about it, but it becomes really overwhelming and you don't understand the system, and we can make all the excuses in the world. So I hope that this shed some light on some of those realities and really showed that, like, again, that ladder of engagement, that no matter where you're at in life, that there's place for you and a way for you to get involved.
Yeah, I think, and that's what's so true. Don't be afraid. No one should ever be afraid to help a child, right? And there's so many, many, many ways you can do it. Everyone has a skill, everyone has a talent, everyone has a heart that will enable them to do that. So thank you for the opportunity to talk to people about one way.
As always, all relevant links can be found in show notes at lapointefoundation.org. As Jennifer said, we all have a way we can get involved, whether that is being a foster parent or donating our small talk. You can find out more information about all of that and all the in between at FosterMore.org. Thank you so much for joining us today, and until next time, keep on fighting for justice.